Lincoln Riley, the head coach of the USC Trojans, came out and had a couple of statements about his quarterback situation, and he walked through it. Joe, we've talked about some of these quarterback situations, guys that will start, like we talked about Notre Dame's not too long ago. We talked about Bama. But there were some questions that were brought up at USC. Lincoln Riley making some of these statements. What do you see moving forward for USC at the quarterback position? And can whoever starts there at that quarterback position for USC lead them back to some relevance here?
Yeah, I was stunned by how Lincoln Riley spoke so confidently and said Jayden's clearly the number one quarterback right now. And you know what it motivated me to do? It motivated me, Blake, to pull up some film for how Maiava played at the end of the season last year. And first and foremost, I thought that Maiava brought a different play style to the offense that they needed early on. And they finished the year strong because Maiava was a bigger, stronger, more physical athlete than what Miller Moss was. But as I was watching the Texas A&M game, I was just hoping for more. I was watching him and hoping for the big play. I was watching and hoping for all right, when does he take the top off of a defense? And I couldn't help but feel anxiety the entire time I was watching him because he is all over the place. I'm saying this to say, I don't know if it should be this clear-cut Jayden Maiava starts. Part of me wonders, as they're gearing up and they're recruiting really well with this 2026 class, if it doesn't make sense for them to start Hussan Longstreet, who is incredibly talented, who they pulled at the last second, highly touted.
A&M.
They pulled him from A&M. Part of me thinks, seeing how some of these other very gifted young quarterbacks did last year, that it might benefit them. And we'll dig in a little bit more on what Maiava brings to the table, but I just feel a little weird that he's already declaring and confidently saying that the battle's over. It's clearly going to be Maiava.
After what happened with Fran Brown at Syracuse, naming Ricky Collins the starting quarterback and going and getting Steve Angeli, do you really believe any head coach at current moment? Because I don't.
It's a fair point.
Now, here's what I'd say. In the A&M game, I think that's a little bit difficult, Joe, because look at how many guys had already exited the building. You had guys like Zachariah Branch already exit. You had guys like Kyron Hudson that had already exited. You had some offensive linemen that opted out of playing the bowl game. I don't know if it's fair, for what it's worth, to do that to him. What I would say, and I know that you've pushed back on me a lot about this, but let's take it from the USC perspective. If I would have told you that a freshman quarterback, either redshirted or true, whatever it may be, would come in against a team that would play for a national title, and with 10 minutes left to go in the fourth quarter, that they're down a touchdown. Now, I understand he threw a pick, right? I think it was a Gray that caught the pick against him.
I believe so, yeah.
And so, like, if I'm and like, you had a young freshman quarterback that was going toe-to-toe. He threw picks. And like, I mean, we go out there and like we'll look at a kid like that and say to ourselves, man, he turned the ball over a lot. Brother, Arch Manning threw 2 picks versus ULM. And his first start. There's a bigger difference in throwing 2 interceptions. We either have won it's a pick six or not, going up against Notre Dame versus ULM. Why does Arch get that benefit of the doubt? Why does he get the – Joe, he threw 4 touchdown passes and ran for another against a team that would wind up playing for a national title. Here's what I'd say on that. The kid showed some elite stuff. There were some elite throws that he made. By the way, receivers that weren't getting a lot of separation from Notre Dame. But I think to the point that I'm trying to make here, the kid did show some really good stuff a year ago. That you got to give him.
I will give it to him. And that was kind of why I was saying that when I pulled up his tape against Texas A&M, his most recent game, I was hoping that I was going to be blown away. Like, I was hoping that I was going to see
after the comments from Lincoln, because of what you said, you wanted to be blown away.
Right. I was hoping that I was going to see, and I had kind of forgotten what his stats were last year, which I'm going to bring up in a second. I was expecting to see a guy that was inconsistent, but at least was going to show me some signs of dominance. Like, it was going to show me some, like, be a better athlete than everybody, evade pressure, make the big throw. His accuracy is all over the place. His decision-making was all over the place. I mean, there were screen passes that he was ripping past guys that were way uncatchable. Screens, simple little throws that he was completely ripping past guys. He had 3 games, including the Notre Dame game, where he was under 57% completion percentage. The Nebraska game was his best performance, which he still had an interception in that game. I just think that the turnovers and the way that he played, he is going to need a massive jump in order for me to feel like he can be a driving force for their success this upcoming season. I just feel like for knowing all of the different quarterbacks that Lincoln Riley has worked with, he feels so different than the typical archetype. The Baker Mayfields, the Kyler Murrays, the Caleb Williams, all of those guys.
Yeah, he is.
That could make plays under pressure. He doesn't really have that trait. So I really start to wonder, how much does he actually elevate this USC team? How much does he really take them to that next level? Are they going to need big performances from guys on the rest of the roster in order to get there?
Well, you need that from any quarterback that's going to be starting for the first time. I mean, he's not the only quarterback that we say that there's going to need bigger performances from other people. Look, let's name some of the new true starting quarterbacks. DJ Lagway a year ago, he had his defense in moments and times against Ole Miss, LSU, even in moments against Florida State, they had to be damn good because DJ was under 60% completion percentage in his first time starting. Arch Manning had an elite front seven, and the secondary was really good for Texas. Even in the Mississippi State game, if you go back and watch in the middle part of that game, Joe, they're down a touchdown in the third quarter, and they're driving the football with Van Buren. By the way, Van Buren was a freshman quarterback that came in who also needed guys around him to play better. I understand what you're saying, but every time first Notre Dame's going to need that. Syracuse is going to need that. Joe, to be honest with you, Georgia's going to need that. Ohio State's going to need that. All of the I think I get what you're saying. My question would be with this, what was the run game situation like? What was the receiver game situation like? Now, his footwork's got to be better. He's got to be better in some of these situations. But I saw a kid who was trying to piece it all together who just wasn't ready. And listen, there's nothing wrong with that.
Well, but
you're asking if he can elevate. You're asking if he can elevate. It's the question that you're asking.
That is, but there's a big difference between him and a lot of the guys that you named. He started for a full season at UNLV, and he actually had a pretty good season when he started at UNLV. And that was why he was sought after in the transfer portal. Well, he was going to go to Georgia.
Because he's a starter doesn't mean that he's not ready. I mean, you can make the archetype that Arch set behind Quinn Ewers on a playoff team and got playing time. I mean, like there's not. I mean, how many years did Steve Angeli or some of these guys that have sat? I mean, Joe Burrow, the guy right here sat for 3.5 years before he got his chance. Sometimes guys aren't ready. Now, your question is, can he elevate them? Alone by himself? No, he won't elevate them by himself. Not right now. And that's not to say down the stretch in his career that he wouldn't. Right now, I don't think that he can.
Well, but the problem with that talking point is that good quarterbacks for Lincoln Riley have been the driving force for his team's success. He needed Caleb Williams to play as good as he did when he won the Heisman. He needed Kyler Murray and Baker Mayfield because the offense was quarterback friendly. It was receiver friendly. All of these things, you needed to have a big play quarterback. So this is what I'm getting at here is that he's so opposite. He's so erratic at times. I'm not trying to be super negative on Maiava. I think that there's absolutely potential there for him, and I think that he could be a big time playmaker and he could take a leap. I'm not saying that he can't. He is far more physically gifted than Miller Moss, which is why he should have started at the beginning of the year last year. I thought that he was much better than Miller Moss. But I call into question, though, that you're not at least considering Longstreet. You're not at least considering it. And it would toss out there that I think that Longstreet could maybe even start by the end of the year, just like Maiava unseated Miller Moss at the end of last season. Your future is Longstreet. It's not Maiava.